All right. Thanks, Nancy. How are you all? Good. Good to be in New York. I grew up in Boston, so kind of hating New York, and then since I moved to San Diego, New York starts to feel more like home. Somehow, I don't know how that works. So I know San Diego has been tremendous, just wonderful for me professionally, for my family. And I think one of the things I love about UC San Diego is that, in my mind, there are kind of a short list of really big problems that we're grappling with in the world today. I think climate change is one of those. I think global poverty is one of those. And UC San Diego is a place where we're doing great work on all of those things. I work on international development, so global poverty. And I want to share with you today my perspective, which is that the way we fight global poverty can and will change in a really profound way in the upcoming years. And I want to share with you why that is. And it really reflects a couple of big trends reshaping the emerging markets that I want to walk you through. The first is evidence. So for the first 50 years or so of doing development economics, we actually didn't really test things very much. It was really bad. So and to give you a sense, imagine the pharmaceutical industry without clinical trials, for example, right? It would be like we're kind of sitting around looking at molecules and talking about which molecule has a good theory of change, or telling success stories about someone that took Tylenol and recovered from cancer, things like that. It's sort of crazy. And so that finally changed in the early 2000s when we first started doing experimental testing, what are called randomized controlled trials of interventions in development economics. And I was doing my Ph.D. at the time, and it was an incredibly exciting time because we were learning things really quickly. And there were some disappointments, right? There were things that we had thought would work that turned out not to. Microcredit hasn't worked as well as we'd hoped. I think jobs training and skills training interventions, you know that expression, right? Sort of teach a man to fish and you feed him for it. Turns out, totally not true. We're really bad at teaching people to fish. But there are also a lot of positive surprises, and so one of the big surprises from this first round of impact evaluations that we've been doing has been that consistently across a whole bunch of them, just giving people money has actually worked quite well. Across a lot of these studies, you don't see people systematically drinking the money, as a lot of us feared. You don't see people stopping work, and you do see this really diverse set of positive impacts, depending on the context and the person, ranging from education to improved health to increases in their earnings from other sources, and including some of the longest term impacts that you see anywhere in development economics. So this has really, I think, kind of profoundly reshaped the way we think about the poor and about what they can do with capital. So that's observation number one. The second is what's happening with payments technology. So we increasingly live in a world in which we are connected financially to some of the poorest people on the planet. I think I may have skipped 2 slides here. I'm going to run it back. In many parts of the world, all it takes is a $10 mobile phone for poor people to be able to receive money electronically, right, through mobile money technology. In East Africa, where we do a lot of work, the end-to-end cost of moving money from my bank account onto somebody's phone and then into their hands is about 3% of the amount we send them. That's foreign exchange spreads and then the in-country tariffs to get the money to them. So that's remarkably low. And I think that creates an incredible opportunity. And when we were in grad school, my colleagues and I felt like that was a great opportunity, and we wanted to be able to give that way. And so we went to see if any of the existing NGOs would let us do that, and it turns out that they don't. They're not planning to do that. And long story, but I think the bottom line is we've built this aid infrastructure which fundamentally is there to allocate capital on behalf of poor people. And the possibility that they could actually allocate some of that capital themselves poses some existential threats to the sector and to a lot of those jobs. So we came to the conclusion that if we wanted to be able to give this way, we would have to create it for ourselves, and so created the NGO Give Directly as a response to that. And Give Directly's growth has been really exciting since then. So we opened to the public in 2011, have grown to about $50 million in revenue last year. And I think just as important as that, have also built it as a platform for further research and impact evaluation. So last year, just about every dollar that we spent was part of at least one randomized controlled trial, sometimes multiple. And we're testing the things that other people don't have the political will to test. So nobody really knew what would happen if you give a large windfall of cash to a really poor household. So we tested that. We're working with USAID. They have never tested. They don't know how the impacts of cash transfers compare to what they typically spend money on. We're testing that, working with Craig McIntosh at the Global Policy School in San Diego. So this, I think, is one frontier. But the other is that there are still a lot of people who aren't plugged in to these global payment systems. And so the other thing that we're working on is expanding that network. Karthik Muralidharan and I in the economics department at UC San Diego have had the opportunity to work on this with the government of India. India is in the midst of what I think is one of the most ambitious policy agendas and experiments on the planet, trying to roll out solutions like this one, which are based on biometric authentication to 1.2 billion people, and then use those to reshape the way they deliver anti-poverty programs in their country. It's tremendously exciting. To give you some sense of why it matters, India spends about 2% of GDP every year on its anti-poverty programs, and by their own estimates lose about half of that to fraud and corruption. So there's enormous scope, right, for this kind of technology to do good. We worked with the government of Andhra Pradesh, which is an Indian state, to roll out this intervention across about 20 million people, what we think is one of the largest randomized controlled trials ever conducted, and found about a 30% reduction in corruption from that intervention, as well as improvements in people's access to payments, time to collect, and so forth. And bottom line, 90% of people preferred this to the status quo. And so that research was instrumental in the government's decision to move ahead and keep the new technology. So this is what I think of as the other big frontier. My challenge to all of you guys, if I could leave you with one thought tonight, is, taking all this into account, imagine a world where we can pay anyone, anytime, anywhere, because that is the world that we're building, and then ask, would we still do aid the way we've conventionally done it, right? Would we still put goats on boats, right, or ship bags of rice around the world? This is the kinds of questions that we're trying to test at UC San Diego. I'll give you my personal perspective. I certainly don't think cash transfers to poor people are going to solve all of our problems. Roads are not going to build themselves. Vaccines are not going to discover themselves just because poor people have some more money. But I think it should be a much larger share of our spend. And I also think it should be a benchmark for the rest of what we do. Right? With every dollar we spend, we should ask ourselves the tough question of, are we sure? Is there good reason to think that we can do more good for the poor with this money than they could do for themselves? Because if we ask that question, if we're honest with ourselves, in many cases, the answer is going to be no. Thanks.